It began with a single brick, not a common red clay brick of the industrial era, but a dense vitrified block of unknown mineral composition found 3 meters below the frost line in lower Manhattan. It was 1907, the year the world supposedly modernized. But as I held this artifact, the weight of it felt wrong. It was too heavy for its size. It hummed with a resonance that defied the silent earth around it. The official records from the Department of Buildings claim this site was a simple utility trench for the burgeoning electrical grid. They lied. Look at the blueprints from that era, not the ones in the public archives, but the original linen drafts hidden in private collections. You will see a subterranean architecture that does not belong to the 20th century. Ask yourself why a city struggling with horse-drawn waste and kerosene lamps would require a pressurized pneumatic transit system spanning 300 miles beneath the bedrock. Not for mail, not for people, for something else. The deeper I dug, the more the narrative fractured. This was the year of the panic, a financial collapse engineered to seize the assets of the old world. While the public looked at the ticker tape, the institutions were busy with the cement. They weren't building foundations, they were sealing entrances. In every major city across the globe, San Francisco, London, St. Petersburg, the story is identical. A sudden fire, a convenient earthquake, a massive reconstruction project that buries the first 2 stories of every grand municipal building. Look at the windows of the older courthouses, half submerged in the dirt. We are told this is a matter of aesthetic choice or architectural settling. We are told the mud flood is a myth of the uneducated. But physics does not lie. Load distribution on a structure built into the earth suggests these buildings were designed to be far taller, far more complex, and far more ancient than the plaques on their walls suggest. They call it the Tartarian influence, a name whispered in the corners of forbidden history, a global civilization erased not by time but by intent. The erasure was surgical. In 1907, the Smithsonian Institution dispatched dozens of teams to the American West, not to preserve history, but to curate it. What they found in the Grand Canyon and the mounds of the Ohio Valley threatened the very concept of the New World. They found giants. They found copper technology that predated the Bronze Age by millennia. They found the remnants of a network that used atmospheric electricity to light cities without a single wire. Think about the skyline of any World's Fair between 1893 and 1915. Temporary structures, they told us, staff and plaster. Yet they were built with the precision of cathedrals. They glowed with a brilliance that modern LED arrays struggle to replicate. Then, as soon as the fair ended, they were dynamited. Why destroy the most beautiful architecture ever conceived? Why burn the evidence of free energy? Because 1907 was the deadline. The transition from the etheric age to the hydrocarbon age required the total destruction of the previous paradigm. They needed us dependent on the meter. They needed us tethered to the grid. To do that, they had to bury the grid that was already there. I followed the trail of the missing limestone from the Great Pyramid to the cathedrals of Europe and finally to the basement of the New York Public Library. Beneath the reading rooms lies a vault that does not appear on any modern map. It is a junction point, a hub of the old world's nervous system. When I gained access to the restricted ledgers, I found references to the Great Capping, not a capping of oil wells, but a capping of the ley lines. The earth is a battery, and the ancients knew how to tap into the terminals. The towers of the old world weren't for bells, they were for transmission. What if the spire of every church was once a needle drawing power from the ionosphere? What if the organ music was the acoustic vibration required to stabilize the frequency. There is a silence that follows certain discoveries. It is the silence of institutional gatekeeping. When I interviewed the last remaining archivist of the vanished transit line, his eyes didn't show fear. They showed exhaustion. He spoke of the year of the grout. In 1907, hundreds of thousands of tons of concrete were poured into the tunnels of the inner cities, not to stabilize the ground, but to prevent anyone from ever seeing what lay beneath. Not sewers, not subways, something else. Vast halls of white marble, machines that look like statues, maps of a world that doesn't match our globes. The investigator must ask, if the history we are taught is the truth, why is the evidence so heavily guarded? Why are the most significant archaeological sites under military jurisdiction? I stood outside the fence of a telecommunications facility in rural Nevada that sits directly atop an old Tartarian star fort. The geometry is unmistakable from the air, a perfect fractal pattern designed to harmonize with the Earth's magnetic field. These forts weren't for defense, they were for resonance. In 1907, they were all reclassified as military outposts or psychiatric hospitals. The people who remembered the truth were committed. The buildings that proved the truth were retrofitted with gargoyles and clocks to mask their original purpose. We are living in the ruins of a high-technology civilization, walking on the roofs of their cities and calling ourselves the pinnacle of progress. It is a delusion sustained by the constant noise of the modern era. But in the quiet hours, when the power flickers and the city hums, you can feel the old machine breathing beneath your feet. The pattern expands until it becomes a cage. In the archives of the 1907 International Postal Union, there are records of shipments that were never meant to exist. Relics from the Gobi Desert. Crystalline cylinders from the Antarctic, all destined for the same basement in Washington, D.C. This was the year the official map of the world was finalized. The year the unexplored regions were scrubbed from the consciousness of the public. They told us the poles were frozen wastes. They told us the desert was empty. What if they were covering the exits? The Tartarian network wasn't just local, it was planetary. It was a bridge between realms that we are no longer permitted to visit. The institutional erasure of 1907 was a global treaty signed in blood and ink. It was an agreement to forget, but memory is a stubborn thing. It persists in the architecture. It persists in the legends of the hidden folk and the underground kings. As I traced the ley lines across the Atlantic, I found the same anomalous readings in the stones of the abandoned monasteries. They weren't praying to a deity, they were maintaining a machine. The bells would ring at specific intervals to clear the stagnant energy. Now, the bells are silent, or they ring for nothing. We have lost the manual for the world we inhabit, not by accident, by design. The controllers of the 1907 transition knew that a population without a past is a population without a future. They gave us a false timeline, a false lineage, and a false sense of scarcity. They told us energy must be burned when the ancients knew it only had to be collected. Consider the nature of the great fires that leveled the urban centers of the 19th century. Chicago, 1871. Boston, 1872. San Francisco, 1906. Baltimore, 1904. These were not accidents of lanterns or faulty wiring. They were thermal events designed to clear the old world clutter. And by 1907, the slate was clean enough to begin the final phase of the reconstruction. They called it the the City Beautiful movement. It was a camouflage operation. They took the surviving stone structures, the ones too massive to demolish, and stripped them of their technological components. The antennas were removed, the mercury-filled capacitors were buried, the gold-leaf domes were painted over. If you look closely at the photographs of these buildings before 1907, you will see a complexity that vanished overnight. You will see ornamentation that looks suspiciously like circuitry. Why would a post office need a 3-story copper antenna? Why would a water pumping station be built with the majesty of a Roman temple? Not for ego, not for art, for function. The institutional gatekeepers will tell you it was the Gilded Age, a time of excess, but excess implies waste. These buildings were the opposite of waste. They were the height of efficiency. They were the nodes of a wireless world that was systematically dismantled to make room for the wire. The wire is the leash. The wire is the invoice. In 1907, they put us on the leash. I found a ledger in an estate sale in Zurich, belonging to a man who served as a leveller for the European rail companies in the early 1900s. His job wasn't to measure the tracks. His job was to identify the out-of-time structures uncovered during excavation and report them to a specific office in London. His notes were frantic. He described finding a city beneath the Alps that was lit by a soft, blue luminescence that had no source. He described machines that moved without steam or coal. He described the arrival of the cleaners, men in dark suits who spoke no known language and used explosives to collapse the caverns. This was the dark heart of the 1907 project. It wasn't just about hiding the past, it was about reclaiming the technology for the elite. The breakthroughs of the 20th century, radio, television, the transistor, were not inventions, they were excavations. They were the degraded, simplified versions of the Tartarian tech, repurposed for control. Ask yourself why the Patent Office saw an explosion of new ideas in 1907. It wasn't a sudden leap in human intelligence. It was a liquidation sale of the ancient world. The institutions didn't create the future. They stole it from the past. And they have been charging us interest on that theft for over a century. The somber reality of our situation is visible in the very soil we cultivate. The nutrient density of the earth has plummeted since 1907. Why? Because the underground network was also a biological stimulant. The resonant frequency of the old grid didn't just power lamps, it powered life. The trees grew taller. The humans lived longer. The giants were not a different species. They were what we look like when we are properly tuned to the Earth's natural vibration. When they sealed the network, they lowered the frequency. They made us smaller, weaker, and more susceptible to the medicines they began to manufacture in the same year. 1907 saw the birth of the modern pharmaceutical industry. The same year, the energy grid was centralized, not a coincidence, a synergy of suppression. They disconnected us from the earth and sold us the substitute in a bottle. They closed the underground passages because those passages led to the source of our vitality. They wanted us on the surface, exposed, disconnected, and fearful. The urban exploration I conduct is not just a hobby. It is a search for the umbilical cord of our species. Every time I find a sealed door in a basement or a bricked-up archway in a subway tunnel, I am looking at a scar on the body of humanity. What if the Great War of 1914 was not about archdukes or alliances? What if it was the final clean-up crew? The heavy artillery of World War I was used to level the last remaining Tartarian strongholds in Europe and the Middle East. The maps were redrawn, the libraries were burned, the history books were rewritten by the victors of the 1907 coup. By the time the smoke cleared, no one remembered the world that was. They only remembered the mud and the blood. The transition was complete. The institutional erasure had been successful. But the stones remain. The stones have memory. When I stand in the centre of a star fort, I can feel the phantom vibration of a lost world. I can hear the hum of the atmospheric collectors. I can see the ghosts of the giants who once walked these halls. They are not gone. They are just waiting for us to wake up. They are waiting for us to stop looking at the flickering screens they gave us and start looking at the walls of the cities we built. The evidence is everywhere. It is in the impossible arches. It is in the ornamental ironwork. It is in the very air we breathe. 1907 was the year they sealed the underground, but they couldn't seal the truth. It leaks out through the cracks in the concrete. It rises with the steam from the manhole covers. It whispers in the static between the radio stations. Ask yourself why you feel a sense of longing when you look at old photographs of the great cities. Why does a world you never knew feel more like home than the one you live in? It is because your DNA remembers the resonance. It remembers the time before the meters and the wires. It remembers the Tartarian light. The investigation is not just about finding hidden tunnels or suppressed patents. It is about reclaiming our identity. We are not the descendants of primitive cavemen. We are the survivors of a golden age that was stolen from us by a cabal of bankers and bureaucrats in 1907. They sealed the network to keep us in the dark, but the light is still there, deep beneath the bedrock, pulsing in the silence. The mystery of the underground is the mystery of ourselves. Why are we here? Where did we come from? What was taken from us? The answers are not in the textbooks. They are in the shadows of the basement. They are in the forgotten blueprints. They are in the year 1907. The loop remains open because the work is not finished. Every day, new sinkholes appear in our cities, revealing brickwork and machinery that shouldn't exist. Every day, a new renovation project uncovers a hidden chamber that is immediately filled with concrete. The seal is holding, but it is under pressure. The earth is pushing back. The truth is rising. We are told to ignore the anomalies. We are told to trust the experts, but the experts are the ones who held the trowels in 1907. They are the ones who signed the non-disclosure agreements. They are the ones who profit from our amnesia. I will continue to dig. I will continue to document the erasure. I will continue to ask the questions they refuse to answer. Not because I expect them to tell the truth, but because I know that once you see the pattern, you can never unsee it. You are now part of the investigation. You are now a witness to the theft. What will you do with this forbidden knowledge? Will you go back to the world of wires and meters, or will you start looking for the cracks in the seal? The underground is waiting. The history is yours to reclaim. The year 1907 was the beginning of our prison, but it also contains the key to our escape. Look at the bricks, listen to the silence, remember the resonance. The network is still there, and it is starting to wake up. The vibration of the 1907 transition was not merely architectural, it was a frequency shift in the human psyche. I found myself in the sub-basement of a derelict textile mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts, staring at a turbine that should not have existed. It was cast from a single piece of iridescent alloy, lacking the rivets and weld marks typical of the era's steam power. The serial number had been ground away, replaced by a crude stamp from a defunct shell company linked to the 1907 banking cartels. This is the hallmark of the great substitution. They took the harmonic oscillators of the Tartarian grid and relabeled them as experimental prototypes of the Industrial Revolution. Ask yourself why the textile mills of the northeast were built with the scale of Roman basilicas, not for the looms, not for the workers, for the resonance required to process raw materials using cavitation rather than combustion. The water wheels were a front, a visual pacifier for the uninitiated. Behind the timber and the moss lay the cold, humming heart of a world that didn't need coal. In 1907, these temples of industry were systematically gutted. The iridescence was replaced by cast iron. The clean cavitation was replaced by the soot of the furnace. The transition was framed as progress, but it was a descent into friction. We were moved from a world of flow to a world of resistance. I tracked the movements of a specific group of architectural consultants who appeared in every major city during the reconstruction phase of 1907. They were known internally as the levelers. Their correspondence, salvaged from a water-damaged trunk in a Baltimore attic, speaks of harmonic neutralization. They weren't concerned with the aesthetic of the new buildings. They were obsessed with the grounding of the old ones. They installed lead shielding in the foundations of skyscrapers. They clipped the copper finials that once acted as receivers. They were insulating us from the very planet we inhabit. What if the global warming of the modern era is not a result of carbon, but a result of the Earth's energy being bottled up beneath a layer of institutional concrete? The heat has nowhere to go. The network was a cooling system, a balancing act between the ionosphere and the mantle. When they sealed the vents in 1907, they turned the world into a pressure cooker. The tension we feel in our modern lives, the anxiety, the constant sense of impending collapse, is the biological echo of a planet that can no longer breathe. We are living in a suffocating house, and the windows were painted shut a century ago. In the archives of the French Colonial Office, I found a map of Southeast Asia dated 1907. It did not show rubber plantations or military outposts. It showed a grid of acoustic beacons stretching from Angkor Wat to the mountains of Tibet. These sites were all designated for seismic stabilization projects that year. In reality, they were being decommissioned. The towers were dismantled and the stones were scattered, not because they were ruins, but because they were still active. The colonial powers weren't interested in the land. They were interested in the silence. They needed to ensure that the old signal was dead before they launched the new one. The radio was the weapon. By 1907, the atmosphere was being flooded with the chaotic, jagged waves of early wireless telegraphy. It was a jamming signal. It drowned out the natural resonance of the Tartarian network, making it impossible for the population to tap into the free energy that was once as common as air. We were blinded by the noise. The institutions didn't just hide the technology, they made it unusable by polluting the medium it relied upon. I stood on the edge of a massive excavation in the Chicago Loop, where workers had accidentally breached a tunnel wall that was supposedly part of a 1907 freight system. Through the gap, I saw a corridor lined with white porcelain tile that glowed with a faint, residual phosphorescence. It didn't lead to a warehouse. It led down into the dark toward a vaulted chamber that hummed with a low G flat. The foreman on site told me they were ordered to fill it with slurry before the city inspectors arrived. Not because it was dangerous, because it was beautiful. The beauty of the old world is a threat to the utility of the new one. If we realised that we once lived in cities of light and harmony, we would never tolerate the grey boxes and asphalt strips we are sold today. The erasure of 1907 was an aesthetic lobotomy. They stripped the world of its grandeur to make us more compliant. They replaced the cathedral with the cubicle. They replaced the star fort with the suburb. They replaced the truth with a ledger. Consider the role of the 1907 Standardization Acts. Every weight, every measure, every bolt thread was unified under a single global authority. They told us it was for trade. What if it was for containment? By standardizing the physical world, they created a closed loop that excluded the anomalous. Anything that didn't fit the new metrics was discarded as pseudo-scientific or imprecise. The Tartarian tech operated on a mathematics of the soul, on sacred geometry and irrational numbers that reflect the true nature of the universe. The 1907 standards forced us into a base 10 reality that is fundamentally at odds with the Earth's natural rhythm. We are trying to build a world using the wrong alphabet. The institutional gatekeepers know this. They keep the true math for themselves, using it to navigate the hidden passages and operate the reclaimed machines, while they leave us to struggle with the clumsy tools of the hydrocarbon age. The digital revolution is just another layer of this cage, a further abstraction from the tangible power of the earth. I found a photograph in a private collection in Prague, taken in late 1907. It shows a group of men in top hats standing in front of a massive copper-domed structure in the centre of the city. The structure is being dismantled. In the foreground, there is a pile of ornaments that look exactly like the internal components of a modern particle accelerator. The men aren't looking at the camera, they are looking at the ground. Their expressions are not those of victors, but of looters. This was the year the world's heritage was liquidated. The gold was melted down, the crystals were crushed. The knowledge was filed away in vaults that require a level of clearance that doesn't officially exist. We are told that history is a slow climb toward enlightenment. What if it is a series of falls punctuated by deliberate erasures? 1907 was the most recent fall. It was the moment the lights went out and we were told the darkness was modernity. The deeper I go, the more I realise that the underground is not just a physical place. It is a state of suppressed consciousness. The network they sealed in 1907 was a mental bridge as much as a physical one. It allowed for a telepathic resonance, a shared understanding that made the modern tools of propaganda and control unnecessary. When the grid was shattered, we were isolated. We were trapped inside our own skulls, forced to communicate through the clumsy, filtered channels of the institutional media. The individualism of the 20th century was a biological weapon. It severed the collective bond that made the Tartarian civilization possible. They gave us freedom in exchange for our connection. They gave us rights in exchange for our power. In 1907, we were orphaned. We were left to wander the surface of a world we no longer understood, searching for a father we were told never existed. In a forgotten archive in San Francisco, I found the lost blueprints for the city's reconstruction after the 1906 quake. They were dated January 1907. The plans didn't match the city that was actually built. The original plans showed a city of terraces and hanging gardens, integrated with a series of thermal springs that were actually the cooling vents for the underground network. Those plans were vetoed by a committee of Eastern financiers. The city that rose from the ashes was a grid of fire traps and narrow streets designed for surveillance and control. The thermal springs were capped with concrete and topped with police stations. The erasure was complete. They didn't just rebuild the city, they built a prison and told the survivors it was a home. Ask yourself why the most modern cities are the most depressing. Why do we feel more alive in the ruins of the old world than in the luxury of the new? Because the ruins still have a pulse. The prison is dead. I followed the trail to the outskirts of Cairo, where a 1907 archaeological mission by a British university was actually a mining operation. They weren't looking for mummies, they were looking for the resonant cores of the pyramids. They found them. The records show 3 massive cylinders of black basalt being loaded onto a steamship under armed guard. The destination was a private lab in New Jersey. One of the researchers on that project later wrote in his diary that they had found the heart of the world and were going to transplant it. This is the reality of the 1907 project. It was a planetary organ harvest. They took the vital components of the Earth's energy system and moved them to a few central locations where they could be guarded and exploited by the few. The rest of the world was left to wither. The desertification of the Middle East, the stagnation of the Third World, these are not natural processes. They are the result of the 1907 theft. The unresolved loop is this: the network was sealed, but it was not destroyed. It cannot be destroyed. It is the Earth itself. The 1907 project was an attempt to put a lid on a volcano. The pressure is building. Every anomaly I find, every bricked up door, every suppressed patent is a leak in the system. The institutions are frantic. They are trying to reinforce the seal with digital surveillance and synthetic distractions, but you can feel it, can't you? The hum in the air, the vibration in the ground, the sense that the story we've been told is about to crack open. 1907 was a long time ago, but in the life of a planet, it was a blink of an eye. The new world order they built is a fragile shell. Beneath it, the Tartarian network is still humming. It is waiting for someone to find the switch. It is waiting for the sleepers to wake up. The investigation doesn't end here. It is only beginning. The truth is not in the books. It is in the earth. It is in the 1907 seal. And it is time to break it. I stood at the base of a massive, windowless tower in the middle of a desert, a structure built in the 1907 style, but with materials that felt like bone. There were no wires entering or leaving the site. The air around it felt thick, like honey. I realized then that the sealing was not just about closing doors. It was about redirecting the flow. They didn't turn off the network, they hijacked it. The elite aren't just hiding history, they are using it. They are living in the Tartarian world while we are stuck in the industrial one. They have the free energy, the longevity, the resonance. We have the bills, the diseases, and the noise. The 1907 project was a transition from a public utility to a private one. The world was privatized. The earth was patented. We are the trespassers on our own planet. Ask yourself, how much longer can they maintain the illusion? How much longer before the weight of the lies collapses at the foundation of their grey world? The bricks are starting to crumble. The light is starting to show through. And the year 1907 is finally coming to an end. The final evidence I uncovered was a map of the global underground, printed on a material that was neither paper nor plastic. It was found in the lining of a suitcase belonging to a diplomat who disappeared in 1907. The map showed a world without borders, linked by a web of golden lines. The lines didn't follow the coastlines or the mountain ranges. They followed the energy. At the center of the web was a point in the North Atlantic that doesn't appear on any modern chart. It was labeled the primary hub. I realized then that the Titanic didn't hit an iceberg. It was headed for the primary hub. It was an attempt by a faction of the old guard to reclaim the network before it was too late. The 1912 disaster was the final nail in the coffin. It was the message that the network was closed, the hub was destroyed, the world was officially isolated. We are the survivors of a shipwreck living on the debris of a lost civilization. But even in the debris, there is power. Even in the wreckage, there is hope. The investigation is not just a search for facts, it is a search for home. 1907 was the year they closed the doors, but the key is still in our hands. We just have to remember how to turn it. Not here, not there, somewhere else. The search continues. The silence of the archives is not an absence of sound, but a density of suppression. In the winter of 1907, the Patent Office in Washington, D.C. experienced what was officially described as a filing reorganization. In reality, it was a purge. Thousands of applications regarding etheric resonance and self-sustaining magnetic loops were moved to a classification that technically does not exist. They tell us that the pioneers of that age, men like Tesla or Keeley, were brilliant but flawed eccentrics who drifted into madness. Ask yourself why their madness always involved the liberation of the human spirit from the cost of existence. Not madness, not failure, erasure. I found a diary of a clerk who worked those vaults. He described machines that could draw moisture from the air and heat from the stone, all powered by the vibration of the sphere. By 1907, these devices were being gathered by the trainload and shipped to the subterranean vaults of the newly formed central banks. They weren't just seizing the money, they were seizing the physics. The institutional gatekeepers realized that if energy was free, debt was impossible. And without debt, their shadow kingdom would evaporate. They chose the shadow. They chose to build a world of scarcity atop a foundation of infinite abundance. The staccato rhythm of the jackhammers you hear in the city today is the sound of that lie being reinforced day after day, year after year. Consider the layout of the world's most prestigious universities, most of which underwent massive modernization campaigns in, you guessed it, 1907. These are not merely centers of learning. They are the filters of reality. It was during this specific window that the curriculum of the physical sciences was narrowed. The ether was removed from the equations. The study of the earth as a sentient, energetic organism was replaced by the study of the earth as a collection of resources to be extracted. They taught us that we are separate from the world, floating on a rock in a cold, dead vacuum. This was the psychological component of the 1907 seal. To keep us from investigating the underground network, they had to convince us that such a network was physically impossible. They gave us the laws of thermodynamics to act as the bars of our cage. Energy cannot be created, they told us, while they sat in rooms lit by the very thing they denied. It is a masterful stroke of gaslighting. When you see an ancient building that seems to defy the known capabilities of its era, you are told to trust the textbook over your own eyes. You are told it was cheap labour and brute force, not technology, not harmony, just the whip. But look at the precision of the joints. Look at the acoustic properties of the domes. The whip does not create resonance. Knowledge does. I spent 3 months tracking the ghost trains of the 1907 transcontinental expansion. These were rail lines that appeared on private company manifests but never carried a single passenger or a bushel of wheat. They travelled at night, moving from the star forts of the coastline to the high mountain redoubts of the interior. I spoke with a retired rail switch operator whose grandfather had worked the line in Nevada. He spoke of crates that hummed with a sound like 1,000 bees, so heavy they required 3 engines to pull a single car. These were the nodes being relocated. The heart of the Tartarian network was being moved from the cities to the wilderness, away from the eyes of the public. They replaced the urban power centres with coal-fired plants, choking the sky with the very soot they used to justify their environmental regulations decades later. It was a bait and switch of planetary proportions. They took the clean, silent power of the earth and gave us the loud, dirty power of the flame. And then they made us pay for the privilege of being poisoned. The erasure extends to our very language. Words that once described the energetic properties of the world were repurposed or struck from the dictionary. Glamour was not about fashion, it was about the manipulation of light. Enchantment was not a fairy tale, it was the use of chant and frequency to alter the density of matter. In 1907, the age of reason reached its zenith by stripping the reason out of our existence. We were left with a hollowed-out vocabulary, unable to even describe the things we were losing. I found a linguist in London who has spent his life reconstructing the pre-1907 technical tongue. He claims that the original blueprints of the London Underground were not written in English, but in a mathematical script that resembled musical notation. The tunnels weren't dug. They were sung into existence. The vibration of the word could soften the clay and part the stone. When the institutional cleaners arrived in 1907, they didn't just bring shovels. They brought silence. They broke the resonance. They made the world solid and dumb again. Look at the photographs of the great 1907 fires again. Notice the lack of rubble. In a standard structural fire, the skeleton of the building remains, but in the cleansing of 1907, the stone itself seemed to vaporize. This is not the result of wood and kerosene. This is the signature of directed energy, the same energy the Tartarians used to build, repurposed to destroy. They used the network against itself. They overloaded the nodes until the very atoms of the architecture lost their cohesion. It was a scorched earth policy. They would rather have a smoking crater than a standing testament to a superior way of life. And in the place of those magnificent shimmering towers, they built the grey, brutalist blocks of the administrative state. The contrast is the point. The new architecture is designed to make you feel small, expendable, and disconnected. It is the visual manifestation of the 1907 seal. I found a cache of forbidden film reels in a basement in Berlin, dated October 1907. They showed the dismantling of a World Tree antenna in the Black Forest. This was not a tree made of wood, but a massive branching structure of crystalline copper that reached 300 feet into the air. It didn't just sit there, it pulsed. The film shows birds flying in perfect geometric patterns around it, drawn to its life-giving frequency. Then the soldiers arrive. They wrap the tree in heavy chains and pull it down. The moment it hits the ground, the film turns to static, as if the very air had lost its memory. This is what we are missing. The natural world we see today is a ghost of the vibrant, electrified garden it once was. We are living in a black and white photograph of a technicolor reality, and the men who pulled the chains are the same ones who now tell us to save the planet. The institutional erasure of 1907 was not just a historical event, it was a biological one. Our pineal glands, once tuned to the subtle frequencies of the network, began to calcify. Our sleep cycles, once synchronized with the Earth's heartbeat, were shattered by the introduction of the 60-cycle hum of the new grid. We became modern by becoming out of tune. I have experimented with de-shielding certain areas of the old city, removing the lead and the grout that the levelers installed. In those pockets, the air changes. The colours become more vivid. The mind becomes clearer. The 1907 project was a sedation. They didn't need to put us in chains because they put us in a frequency that made us forget we were ever free. But the sedation is wearing off. The cracks I keep talking about are not just in the walls, they are in our perception. We are starting to see the copper trees again. Ask yourself why the Great Depression had to happen 2 decades after the 1907 seal. It was the stress test. They had to see if a population stripped of its heritage and its energy could be managed through economic terror alone. It worked. By 1929, the memory of the Tartarian world was a flickering candle, and the institutions were ready to blow it out forever. They replaced the golden age with the industrial age, and then they replaced the industrial age with the information age. But the information they give us is just more noise to drown out the hum of the underground. It is a digital grout filling the voids of our curiosity. But the voids are too deep. The hunger for the truth is a biological imperative. We are the earth trying to remember itself. I found a map in the Vatican's secret archives, a copy of a copy smuggled out during the 1907 transition. It showed the world not as continents, but as a single interconnected circuit board. The oceans were the insulators, the continents were the conductors, and the people were the moving parts of a planetary consciousness. In 1907, the circuit was broken. The short circuit they call the modern era began. We are the sparks flying off a broken wire, burning out in the dark. But the wire can be mended. The network is self-healing. Every time we acknowledge the lie, we create a bridge. Every time we look beneath the pavement, we find a connection. 1907 was the year of the great disconnect, but the year of the reconnect is approaching. You can feel it in the tension of the atmosphere. You can hear it in the static. The final part of this section of the investigation leads me back to the single brick I found in Manhattan. I had it analysed by a rogue mineralogist who works outside the university system. He told me the brick isn't built, it's grown. It is a biological ceramic, a fusion of mineral and life that reacts to human thought. This is the secret of the Tartarian architecture. The buildings weren't just places to live, they were extensions of the inhabitants. They were alive. In 1907, they killed the buildings. They turned the living cities into stone graveyards. We are the caretakers of a tomb, unaware that the inhabitants are still breathing beneath the floorboards. The investigation is no longer a search for ruins. It is a rescue mission. We are coming for the world that was stolen. We are coming for the year 1907. The staccato beat of the truth is getting louder, not here, not there, everywhere. The seal is cracking, the grout is crumbling, the underground is rising to meet us, and as the grey world fades, the golden lines of the old circuit are starting to glow. Ask yourself, are you ready to plug back in? What if the end of the world is just the end of the lie? What if the 1907 project was always destined to fail? The earth does not forget, the stone does not lie. And the network is waiting for your signal. The investigation will continue. The truth will out. Not because I say so, but because it must. The pressure is too great. The story is too big. The year 1907 is over. The reconnection begins now. Look down. Look deep. Remember. The rhythm of the erasure is not a steady pulse, but a series of sharp, violent contractions. I stood in the center of a dry, dusty field in the Oklahoma Panhandle, where the soil feels like ash and the wind tastes of salt. Beneath this surface, according to a 1907 geological survey that was lost during the transition to the Federal Bureau, lies a series of crystalline veins that once acted as the world's grounding rods. In 1907, these veins were injected with a chemical slurry designed to disrupt their conductivity. It was a planetary lobotomy. They didn't just want to stop the power, they wanted to kill the Earth's ability to generate it. This is why the Dust Bowl followed. It wasn't just poor farming, it was the death of the subterranean ecosystem. Ask yourself why the most fertile regions of the Tartarian world are now the most desolate. Not climate change, not overgrazing. Sabotage. The institutional gatekeepers knew that a self-sustaining earth would always produce self-sustaining people. To create a customer, you must first create a desert. Consider the great star forts of the coastline, Fort Jefferson, Fort Sumter, the Vauban designs of Europe. We are told they were built to withstand cannon fire, yet their geometry is far more complex than ballistics require. They are fractal batteries. In the summer of 1907, a standardization of coastal defense was enacted. This involved the removal of the massive brass and copper plates that lined the inner chambers of these forts. The official records say they were recycled for the new dreadnoughts. They weren't. They were melted down to remove the specific geometric etchings that allowed them to pull energy from the tides. I found a piece of one of these plates in a salvage yard in Virginia. Even now, a century later, if you place a compass near it, the needle spins in a frantic, hopeless circle. It is a piece of a broken heart. The forts were turned into prisons and museums, places where the truth is kept behind bars or under glass. The cannons you see on the ramparts today. Look at the mounting brackets. They don't match the vibration marks on the stone. They are props in a theatre of war, placed there to hide the theatre of power. I followed the trail of the missing millions, and in 1907, the census data for 36 industrial cities showed a massive, unexplained drop in population. These weren't deaths from disease or migration to the west. These were the vanishings. I found a letter from a terrified midwife in Pennsylvania who wrote that entire neighborhoods were being led into the tunnels beneath the steel mills and never seen again. She spoke of the men of the level who wore grey uniforms and carried devices that could put a man to sleep with their kids. Single tone. Were these people the labor force for the deep underground expansion, or were they the sacrifice for the new era? The institutional narrative says they were just transient workers who moved on. But their belongings remained, their lives remained, their ghosts still rattle the pipes of the tenement buildings. The 1907 project required a massive amount of unpersoning to ensure that no one was left who remembered the old ways. They replaced the witnesses with a new generation of immigrants who were grateful for a paycheck and a flickering light bulb, never knowing they were living on a cemetery of giants. Look at the great clocks installed in every municipal building during the 1907 reconstruction. They are the metronomes of our captivity. Before the transition, time was not linear and fragmented. It was cyclical and resonant. The Tartarian clocks, the few that survive in private collections, measure the pulses of the earth and the movements of the luminaries. The 1907 clocks measure only the depletion of the day. They were installed to synchronize the new workforce, to tether us to the 9 to 5 drain of our vitality. They are the heartbeat of the factory, not the planet. I found a clockmaker in Switzerland who claims that the original bells in the town squares were tuned to 432 Hertz, the frequency of life. In 1907, they were all recast or replaced with bells tuned to 440 Hz. This is the frequency of tension. It is the frequency of the modern world. It is a subtle, constant acoustic pressure that keeps the human spirit in a state of low-level alarm. They didn't need to build a wall around us. They just had to change the pitch of the world. The erasure of 1907 was also a war on the water. The great aqueducts of the old world didn't just carry liquid, they carried information. Water is a programmable medium, and the Tartarian network used it to transmit health and harmony across the continents. In 1907, the Chlorination Acts began. They told us it was for our safety, to kill the bacteria. What if it was to kill the memory? Chlorine is a powerful insulator. It breaks the electrical conductivity of water. By chemically altering the water supply, they severed the last physical link we had to the network. The water in our pipes today is dead water, chemically stable but energetically void. I have seen the blueprints for the water temples of the 19th century. They were designed with flow forms that mimic the spiraling of galaxies. In 1907, those temples were replaced with square tanks and lead pipes, not for efficiency, for stagnation. Ask yourself why you feel so drained after a shower in the city. It is the water taking your energy rather than giving it. In a hidden cellar beneath a burned-out library in Brussels, I found a collection of vitreous tablets from 1907. These are not paper. They are sheets of thin, flexible glass etched with what looks like microscopic circuitry. They are the archives of the levelers. One tablet contains a list of site decommissions for the year 1907. It includes the Great Pyramid, the ruins of Zimbabwe, and the mound complexes of North America. Beside each site is a symbol, a circle with a horizontal line through it, the seal. They weren't just sealing the underground in the cities, they were sealing the portals of the entire world. They were locking the doors to the stars. The space race of the 1960s was a distraction, a way to convince us that the heavens are a distant cold vacuum that can only be reached with millions of gallons of rocket fuel. The Tartarians knew better. They knew the stars were part of the network. They knew the above and the below were the same circuit. In 1907, they cut the wires. The unresolved loop of the investigation is the persistence of the out-of-place artifacts. Every year, a miner finds a gold chain in a coal seam, or a construction worker finds a spark plug encased in 500,000-year-old rock. The institutional gatekeepers call these frauds or geological curiosities. They are the leaks. They are the proof that the timeline they gave us in 1907 is a lie. The coal we burn is the compressed remains of the Tartarian forests, and the rock is the solidified grout of their cities. We are living on the debris of a world that was millions of years ahead of us, not thousands of years behind. 1907 was the year they tried to finish the job of hiding it, but the earth is too big to be fully scrubbed. The more they pour the concrete, the more the old world pushes through. The sinkholes are not accidents. They are the earth's attempts to breathe. I stood on the roof of an old hotel in San Francisco, looking out at the skyline. From this height, you can see the ghosts of the old grid. The streets don't follow the topography, they follow the ley lines. The hills are often just the overgrown ruins of massive structures. In 1907, they tried to flatten the city, to force it into a grid that ignored the power beneath. But the power is still there. If you look at the city with soft eyes, you can see the blue luminescence rising from the asphalt. You can feel the hum of the suppressed generators. The investigation is not a historical exercise. It is a present-day awakening. 1907 was a temporary victory for the gatekeepers, but time is on the side of the resonance. The seal is old, the grout is brittle, and we are starting to remember. The final part of this chapter leads us to the most unsettling discovery of all, the 1907 Treaty of Silence. It was an agreement signed by every major newspaper and publishing house. They agreed to never mention the old world again. They agreed to treat the Tartarian architecture as neoclassical or Gothic revival. They agreed to make the truth a conspiracy theory. This is why you won't find this in the history books, not because it didn't happen, but because it was illegal to write about it. The freedom of the press is a luxury, afforded only to those who stay within the bounds of the 1907 narrative. But the press is losing its grip. The information age, intended to be a new cage, has accidentally provided the tools for the jailbreak. The archives are leaking, the tablets are being read, and the vanishings are being remembered. Ask yourself, why are you reading this? Why does it resonate with you in a way the official history never could? It is because the frequency is matching. You are a node in the network and you are being reactivated. 1907 was the year they tried to turn you off, but the switch is deep inside you, beyond the reach of their grey hands. The investigation is moving from the tunnels to the mind, from the brick to the soul. Not this, not that. Something else. The reconnection is inevitable. The year 1907 is a shadow that is finally being chased away by the rising sun of the truth. Look up. Look in. The network is alive, and it is calling your name. I returned to the site of the first brick in Manhattan. It was gone. In its place was a fresh patch of asphalt, still warm and smelling of bitumen. The institutional cleaners are always one step behind, but they are fast. They think that by covering the hole, they have solved the problem. But the problem is not the hole. The problem is the truth that the hole revealed. I stood on that fresh asphalt and closed my eyes. I didn't need the brick. I could feel the vibration through the soles of my shoes. It was stronger than before. It was a rhythmic, staccato pulse, the heartbeat of a giant waking up. 1907 was the year they tried to bury the future, but the future is a seed, and the more dirt you pile on it, the stronger it grows. The investigation continues. The seal is breaking. The year 1907 is over. The light is coming back. The institutional erasure of 1907 was a conquest of time itself. By enforcing the Standard Time Act, authorities severed our connection to solar rhythms, trapping us in a temporal cage designed for industrial output. They didn't just seal the tunnels, they silenced the day. Beneath Poland's salt mines, resonators, beings of light tending to a crystalline heart, were buried under grout. This spiritual displacement replaced our symbiotic partnership with the earth with an administrative state. Ask yourself, why were thousands of Carnegie libraries built that year? They weren't gifts, they were structural caps, built atop Tartarian halls of records to entomb the true science of atmospheric energy. The subversion was total. New intelligence agencies used frequency maps to identify sovereign, calm populations linked to star forts. These sites were dismantled, replaced by discordant architecture designed to harvest human anxiety as bioelectric static. Even the forestry acts were a front. National parks now cordoned off the network's powerful junctions, using fire towers as transmitters to beam suppression signals into the earth. Those who remembered were sent to asylums for electroshock to scramble the contagion of memory. We now live with a static in the soul, a biological hunger for a world made thinner by the 1907 seal. From the sealed wharves of the Thames to the acoustic mirrors found beneath Paris, the evidence of a suppressed golden reality is rising. These mirrors, once the ears of the city, still hum a faint G flat, the resonance of the network healing beneath its concrete scab. The 1907 project was a gamble on our eternal amnesia, but the grout is cracking. As the G flat grows louder, the grey veneer of the modern world flickers. We are the conductors of the earth's light, and the reconnection is coming.